All right, hello everyone. So that everyone can hear me well. All right, well thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Shane Mullen, I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books, and I'm so happy and proud to be helping to produce this event. We produce hundreds of author events each year. We produced a ton of virtual events through the pandemic and are so happy to be doing in-person events again in the store after 2 entire years of not having an event inside our very own store. So thank you all so much for coming out. And we do also have the virtual audience joining us. Hello, virtual audience. We plan to continue to offer hybrid events. So if you are ever unable to make it to one of our in-person events, you might be able to find it online afterwards. Some events will still be ticketed because they don't want those always out there in the world, but be sure to check out our event calendar for some really incredible events that we have coming up this fall. You are here tonight for Left Bank Books presents Missouri author and professor Phong Nguyen, who will discuss his new novel, Bronze Drum. And tonight he will be in conversation with Ted Ibur, the executive director of the St. Louis Literary Award. And Ted will share some absolutely incredible news in just a little bit. Tonight's event and our upcoming events are only possible because of your support. When you support Left Bank Books, more so than just helping a bookstore recover from a flood, your money goes directly into the local economy. It helps us keep our bookstore open, our staff paid, it helps keep infrastructure maintained, your libraries funded, your parks free, and so many other things that make St. Louis a better place. I know that I got to enjoy the fantastic free zoo on my birthday, so I would like to thank all of you so much for helping make those local things possible by shopping local. Tonight, Phong Nguyen will be discussing Bronze Drum, a stunning novel of ancient Vietnam based on the true story of 2 warrior sisters who raised an army of women to overthrow the Han Chinese and rule as kings over a united people. Vivid, lyrical, and filled with adventure, The Bronze Drum is a true story of standing up for one's people, culture, and country that has been passed down through generations of Vietnamese families through oral tradition. Phong Nguyen's breathtaking novel takes these real women out of legends and celebrates their loves, losses, and resilience in this inspirational story of women's strength and power, even in the face of the greatest obstacles. Phong Nguyen is the author of 3 novels and 2 short stories. His 2016 novel, The Adventures of Joe Harper, was the winner of the Prairie Heritage Book Award. He is the Miller Family Endowed Chair in Literature and Writing at the University of Missouri, where he teaches fiction writing. Joining him today is Ted Ibur, the executive director of the St. Louis Literary Award. In addition to overseeing the dozens of programs under the umbrella of the St. Louis Literary Award, Ibur is currently working on a collection of short stories. And before we all welcome Phong, let's have a brief announcement from Ted, or is that whatever Ted wants to do. Let's have an applause for everyone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I do have some good news. So the Literary Award, if you didn't already know, started at St. Louis University back in 1967. And we have honored over 50 writers in that amount of time. So Joan Didion, Tennessee Williams, Stephen Sondheim, Mario Vargas Llosa, Margaret Atwood. And then due to the great pandemic scheduling shuffle, we in 16 months, we had in Michael Chabon, Zadie Smith, and Arundhati Roy. So it's been just a crazy schedule over the last year plus. And so this year it feels like a huge breath of relief for us because we have a whole year, well, not quite a whole year now, but this coming April, we have writer Neil Gaiman coming in as our 2023 award recipient. And all these events are open to the public. And I don't know for sure, you know what, I'm not even going to say the venue because we might be I'm not sure where we're having it quite yet this year, but it's sort of. I'm afraid to say it because the place that we've already agreed to is probably watching, and I'm going to be getting some calls tomorrow. One of the things that we do with the programming is we also have a campus read that again is open to the public, and this year it's going to be Gaiman's Stardust, and we're also going to have a campus read for younger readers, The Graveyard Book. So again, open to anybody with registration from anywhere in the world. We'll have speakers from all over the planet throughout the academic year talking about all things Neil Gaiman. And if you didn't already know this, the Sandman series that he wrote started this past Friday on Netflix. It's Netflix, right?
Yes,
Netflix.
yes, on Netflix. I've been watching it.
I will be watching it.
I've been portioning it out, so I'm only watching an episode a day. But it's really it's extraordinary.
I can't wait.
I'm glad that you said Michael Shaven's name because I've never known how to pronounce that. So that's
it is totally the right way because I got it from him.
Yeah, that's I'm glad to hear it.
All right, so I'm going to read what I wrote here. One of the many reasons that I love my job is that I get to be engaged in literature pretty much all the time. I meet fascinating people from all over the world and work with faculty and staff from all over the university, including our Madrid campus, and I collaborate with artists from around the globe. So tonight is no exception, having the opportunity to be with all of you in person and those of you online. I have the distinct honor of being in conversation with the versatile, engaging, and brilliant storyteller, Phong Nguyen. For the past year, almost exactly a year, I've been completely immersed in Phong's writings. I think I have read everything that you've written at this point. He and I did a podcast last spring on Craft Talks with St. Louis University, which you can find on any streaming service or check out the library's website for the video version of it. And so I was so thrilled when I had the opportunity to do this in-person review with Phong as well. So I want to thank everyone here at Left Bank Books and to everyone here. And congratulations to the writer of the hour, Phong Nguyen.
And give a thanks to Left Bank Books for hosting this, and especially during this time of transition for them. Thank you, Ted, for being here. Thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate this.
Absolutely.
People watching at home.
Oh, yeah. So I wanted to start with just a reminder that Bronze Drum came out yesterday. And I've been reading reviews over the last couple of weeks because those reviewers had some galley copies. And I'm going to start with reading some of these, if you don't mind. I don't embarrass you, but I'm going to read some of these. From Publishers Weekly, readers will not want to put this epic feminist page. Let me try that again. Readers will not want to put down this epic feminist page turner. From Booklist, calls it a gripping historical adventure. Target, that's right, you can get your bath mats there as well, said Phong Nguyen's breathtaking novel takes these real women out of legends and celebrates their loves, losses, and resilience in this inspirational story of women's strength and power, even in the face of greatest obstacles. Library Journal says Nguyen's beautifully written novel will be an eye-opener to people who don't know the turbulent history of the Lac Viet and the Han. Readers who remember the Vietnam War and the part the United States played in it might come away with a better understanding of the region and its people. Hold on to that quote for a moment. And then yesterday, while I think the Library Journal is obviously a terrific review, I have to follow it with this fabulous review that aired yesterday on National Public Radio's show. In Phong Nguyen's indelible rendering, Bronze Drum resurrects an early segment of Vietnamese history that both evokes and subverts the founding myth of the United States. The revolutionaries in this story are not white men expounding on the principles of individual liberty while ignoring the harsh realities of slavery, but clear-eyed Southeast Asian women who understand the cost of war and the fraught legacy of peace. The sisters' short-lived quest for independence actually brings on 9 centuries of Chinese direct rule, but also heralds Vietnam's spirit of resistance that persists through the millennia. So I'm pretty sure that you may not agree that Bronze Drum will give readers a better sense of the understanding and people of the region as it relates to the Vietnam War, as the Library Journal review says, but perhaps readers will have a better insight to the Vietnamese spirit of resistance, as the NPR review suggests. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I realized in the boilerplate that is published everywhere. It's on the back of the book. That says something about oral tradition. I did want to say briefly about that that's a little bit of misleading, because the Chung sisters have been written about in Vietnam forever, and Vietnamese families, they do tell their children the story, but it's not just oral tradition. It's in comic books, it's in pop culture, it's everywhere. It's just that in the West, we don't know this story very well, and this book is an attempt to correct that. So in that, my response to the Library Journal article was that I'm glad that it's sort of seeking out that kind of understanding, but it's a little bit funny to try to understand the Vietnam War by looking at something that happened 2,000 years ago. It'd be a little bit like trying to understand, modern Italy by looking at the Roman times. So I found that a little bit funny, but I found the NPR article spot on in its priorities and concerns and emphasis.
It's a great review.
Yeah.
I was so impressed by it. So I thought maybe we could start tonight, if you're okay with it, with doing a reading from the book.
Yeah, I'll read something real short, just the prologue. As you all know, this concerns the Chung sisters, who raised an army of women to fight off the Han occupiers of Latvia territory. And this prologue is written in the voice of one of the characters, Ha, the Guardsman. And the rest of the book is written in a third-person voice, inhabiting many of the minds of these characters. So it's in a slightly different voice from the rest of the book. Gather around, children of Chudian, and be brave. For even to listen to the story of the Chung sisters is, in these troubled times, a dangerous act. The Han gods are jealous of Viet heroes, and while the Han have ruled Latvia for 100 years, our legends threaten to reduce the empire to ashes. Behold the lacquered puppets dancing on a clear pool of water under the moonlight, and think back farther than you ever have before to your ancestor memory and witness. Here are the Chung sisters. Chung Nhi is wild and venturesome, while Chung Chok is disciplined and proud. They ride into war on the backs of elephants, wearing golden armor, brandishing swords that flash in the sun, leading an army of women. And in the distance, the thrashing of the bronze drum announcing the battle at hand. Look, the wicked Han governor enters the stage. He takes Viet honor and blood as if they were shimmering coins in his hands. He will settle for nothing but total subjugation. Soon the armies will clash on the field. The Viet women love freedom and will not bow. The Han men fight to conquer what was never theirs to rule, the soul of this country, its unobtainable heart. Let us clear the stage before we go too far. Let us focus instead on this sublime moment, the cusp of the Chung sisters' triumph. There is nothing more beautiful than the intake and outflow of breath from the bodies of free men and women. Today, on the sands of Tung Lam, there loom two vast bronze columns. General Ma Yuan, who erected them, said that the Han will rule in this land as long as they stand. Yet the shift in the fortunes of women and men is as swift as the darting of the black-winged kite, soaring in one direction, then jinking suddenly in another. The work of nature upon us is more patient, and like the crawl of the snail, seems to leave only a faint trail behind it. Yet the shell endures, emptied of its life, to be worked on by the elements until it is indistinguishable from the rock, until it too joins with the grains on the beach. Children, I say to you this: the bronze columns in the sands of Dong Lam one day will sink, to be swallowed by the tide, and over time taken by the ocean as easily as a body.
Nice. Thank you for that. So I'm curious, what initially piqued your interest into the Chung sisters, and at what point did you decide that you wanted to turn it into a work of historical fiction?
I've always wanted to write about the Chung sisters. It's a story that I knew very, at a young age, so early on that I don't remember the first hearing of it, right? I was frustrated by the fact that nobody at school knew who the Chung sisters were. They're part of my kind of canon of stories, like even like, we hear the story of Monkey King, and people would, other, Asian American kids would know Monkey King often, and some other kids who weren't Asian American would know Monkey King. But nobody seemed to know the Chung sisters. There was only one other Vietnamese family, and they were recent immigrants, and the kids didn't speak English, and I didn't speak Vietnamese. So really, I just knew nobody outside my family that knew the story. And I, had been going to college. My professors didn't know the story. I realized I would have to write the book if I wanted to read it.
Mm-hmm.
And I also realized that being such an epic scope, I would need to write some other books before I get around to writing this one. So I needed to get some practice at the marathon of writing a novel, not to disregard those prior novels, which I have a great love for, but they weren't just practice, weren't just apprentice work, but I did have in mind that I needed to write other books before I wrote this one.
It is a sprawling novel. So I was just, it almost seems, I wonder if it at any point felt overwhelming or intimidating.
So the most intimidated I felt by the writing of the novel was when I first went to research it, maybe around 2013 or so. I didn't start writing until 2016, but I sort of had this notion that I was going to write about it. And so I started to do the research, and I went to the library and found thousands of books about the Vietnam War, and very little prior to 1900, and only one book at the time about ancient Vietnam by Keith Taylor called The Birth of Vietnam. And between 2013 and 2016, there were two other books about ancient Vietnam published. One of them called The Origins of Ancient Vietnam by Nam Si Kim. And so I was able to correspond with Nam Si Kim and work on the research that way. But as that initial thinking, this is going to be impossible because there's nothing on the Chung sisters except for single chapters in books with titles like Tigers in the Rice, or like Women Warriors Throughout History, or something like that. So there was nothing, no serious historical scholarship on the Chung sisters at the time. And luckily, at the time that I was writing it, some of those books started to come out.
So there's a lot of characters in this book, for those of you who haven't read it yet, and I would imagine none of you have read it because it's brand new. But I'm curious if, and this is in an effort to not give anything away, but were there specific characters that you couldn't wait to incorporate, to write about? You already knew who these characters were, and conversely, characters that you really struggled with.
Yeah. So the contemporaneous Chinese historical account mostly comes from Ma Yuan, who is the general who eventually overwhelms the Chung sisters and defeats them. I'm not giving spoilers because you can find this on Wikipedia.
I'm glad you said it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I was interested in writing Ma Yuan's character because there's, reasonably these characters are very inflamed against the Han Chinese, but I didn't want to, as an author, just uncritically enter that inflamed anti-Chineseness in what the Chung sisters held, which of course was determined by their circumstances and background and experience and so on. So I was interested in the subtleties that I could incorporate in Ma Yuan's character specifically, and how even though he's suppressing this revolution of women, he has his own motivation, his own domestic situation, his own his own priorities and outlook.
I loved how you fleshed that character out more too. So we got to see some of his background, his family, the way his wife reacts when he says that he has to go off to war, and then he's going to leave his child behind as well.
Another character, there's a lot of invented characters as well, and so one of those invented characters is the narrator of the prologue, the Guardsman, and I look forward to writing about him because he's sort of based on the Monk Takuan character from Eiji Yoshikawa's book Musashi, and he's sort of the wise fool, and he is somebody that can easily be dismissed. He can be treated as nobody. He has no status really, but he's there all along, and he's doing the right things, and his heart's in the right place, and ultimately all of that jocularity sort of hides his wisdom. And so that I was eager to write that model of character as well and have fun with it.
Yeah, I can see that. The book is quite tense, but Kai's character often provides some comic relief
Right.
in the most stressful of moments.
Right.
Yeah. I think the sign of a successful book is when you care, me, the reader, that cares about what happens to these characters. And when someone dies, whether it was a major or minor character, I always found it jarring.
Mm.
And did you ever feel a sense of like you knew where these were going? Did you ever feel a sense of loss yourself when you were killing people?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, actually that's a very good question, because it's not necessarily obvious that an author would feel that way, and yet I did feel in that critical moment where Chung Chok loses both her husband and her father in the same sort of incident, and it was difficult to write, and I at the same time I kind of had rehearsed it in my mind so many times before writing it because I knew it was coming, and so there was a little. I said it was difficult to write. What I meant is there was kind of actually a flow in writing it, but then revising it was more of a challenge.
Yeah, it totally took me off guard. That whole scene. Did not expect it. I reread it 3 times because I wanted to see, knowing that we were going to do this, I had to back up and see if there was foreshadowing before that occurred. One could argue that there was, but it totally took me off guard.
Yeah. Well, it won't take you off guard because I just told you about it.
You don't know when it's coming.
Yeah.
So, okay. When we had Margaret Atwood in back in 2017 as our Samuels Literary Award recipient, she talked about pre-writing the backstory of the lives of her characters because she wanted to get to know them better. She would do a whole backstory on their education, their family, their family's history, and she finished that whole thing off by saying, right down to their underwear. I wanted to know everything about the character. So specifically in this novel, did you create an outline or a framework of not just the story, but of the characters' backgrounds as well?
Yeah. Certainly not as detailed as what Margaret Atwood is describing, but my favorite way to brainstorm character is through putting them into hypothetical situations. So it's sort of like testing their mettle and seeing what they're made of, and so I did that, as I always do, sort of, what would happen if this kind of unusual or extreme thing happened? What would happen? Sometimes they're like, I don't know, ethics 101 questions, like would they save the priceless painting? Would they save the old woman, or would they the trolley problem, or things like that? Even those can be generative from the point of figuring out your characters as decision makers. Right, and to me, that's the critical thing. I suppose underwear is useful too, but for me, I like to think about the faculty of decision making, and that's what character consists of in large part. To me, is the different ways that we react to the same scenario or phenomena.
It makes me think that there were a number of instances in the novel where there were ethical issues that came up where a character had to make a decision that in virtually every case, it was the decision I didn't think was going to get made, which I loved.
Yeah.
I didn't want to know what I don't like being able to predict what's going to happen.
Right.
So I like the fact that every time you took us off guard, us being me.
Yeah.
All right, so thinking of the actual bronze drum, it became a symbol of resistance for the fighters, but it was also an incredibly important tool for communication both on and in some cases in the story off the battlefield. So for example, Phong Nguyen, the gardener, the keeper of names, and the lover of Chun-Yi, who's one of the twin sisters, plays a specific rhythm every evening on the bronze drum to remind Chun-Yi of his love for her while she's imprisoned for 1 year in the Temple of Angkor. During the battle with the Han Chinese, the Lac Viet women used the drum to communicate battle strategy and positions. Eventually, the Han come to understand both the literal and metaphorical power of the bronze drum and decide that they need to destroy those drums and the drummers. Of course, as a drummer, I was a little miffed by it. But so it's my understanding that these bronze drums, and I may be wrong on this, but are they? It was under the impression they continue to be found archaeologically.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I was curious as to what role those drums played historically and continue to play now.
Yeah. So the drums are both a reminder of that particular episode and moment in history, and a kind of perennial symbol of Vietnam. And you can find them in the National Museum in Hanoi. So according to the historians that I read, they don't know with 100% certainty what the drums were used for. They believe that they were used for all those things, for music, for military purposes, for ritual purposes, but they're basing that on, I think, mostly speculation. And so for the storytelling purposes, I like the idea of it being used for all of those purposes and not exclusively one or another. But it remains an important symbol. Like you can get like iPhone cases with the Dongson drum on it. People have tattoos. If you look up bronze drum on Instagram, you get half this book, and the other half is like people with tattoos of the Dongson drum, and then the drums themselves, of course. So
I must play one at some point.
yeah,
Yeah.
I've only got a replica. I don't have the real ones from 2,000 years ago.
All right, so another kind of lengthy setup for this question.
Sure.
So you're an English professor, you're a writer, but you're also a historian. So your short story collection, Pages from the Textbook of Alternate History, is a reimagining of famous historical characters and how their circumstances turned out differently from the versions with what we're familiar with. So for example, Siddhartha ends up not leaving his father's palace to become an ascetic and create the religion of Buddhism. Instead, in your reimagining of the story, Siddhartha decides to stay in the palace and rules as a Hindu king. In another story, Columbus winds up in Asia instead of the Americas, and Joan of Arc becomes a court musician and a mom to 3 sons. So in your novel, in your novel, The Adventures of Joe Harper, which won the Prairie Heritage Book Award, you take on the voice of Twain and write a riveting and rollicking take on the major minor character of Joe Harper, Tom Sawyer's best friend, who kind of faded into the background when Huck Finn came on the scene. Here you had to learn a lot about 19th century Middle America's culture, language, and geography, and of course take on Twain's voice, which you did impeccably. So all that to say, can you talk a bit about the research that you have to do as a writer to make these stories come alive?
Sure. Yeah, I'll talk about that. I should say I'm emphatically not a historian. We have an actual historian here, so I would say, Mitsu, yeah. I would say that even if Mitsu weren't here, I'm not a historian. I'm a lover of history.
Doing the deep work.
Yeah. I'm a lover of history, and I'm reminded of that through my correspondence with Namsi Kim, who is himself a anthropological archaeologist, and because all my questions like what is the calendrial system, what is the medicinal system, what is all this, it's very cautious. And his answers are like, this what little thing here is what we know, and you're asking me to speculate about all this over here. And so I was exposed to the way the real historians think about these things is very different in terms of my allegiance to the story itself in every case. So I do want to clarify that. But as far as the role of research and the role of history, I'll say a couple things. One is that when I experience what people might call writer's block, I will read and read and read until I feel like I can talk back to the work. And usually the times where I want to talk back the most are when I'm reading history. So I'm not sure why that is, but that's just tends to be the case with me. And and then the research itself, when it came to the pages of the textbook of alternate history, the challenge was actually to refrain from doing too much research and reading, and because it would be moving me away from the writing. And so I had to limit myself to, at a certain point in the first couple of stories, I just would read and read and read and then forget to write the story. But eventually I settled on, one of, contemporary account of that historical moment, one contemporaneous account, and then one witness to history. And of course, some of those didn't have a witness to history, there some of it, but so that was my process of research for that. For Adventures of Joe Harper, it was very kind of functional. It would be like, was there hobo writing in the 1870s, or is that it turns out that came about closer to the Depression era. And even though there were hobos in the 1870s, there wasn't hobo writing. What would people have used as a drug when, in the post-Civil War era when opium was super expensive, and then I'd have to look that up, And so it was very kind of functional for that, and a lot of it concerned the Pike County dialect, and it turns out the best resource for that is Twain himself, and then for Bronze Drum, it was what I've described, a lot of going to correspondence with Namsi, hundreds of emails exchanged with him where he's telling me things like there wouldn't have been the Haozai, this the traditional dress of women in Vietnam, and there wouldn't have been the Nong Lao, which are the conical hats, which they're always represented as wearing. They wouldn't have been riding on elephants, and I was like, "You're a wet blanket." I'm going to put those things in anyway. They're too important to the national. But yeah, so the process of research was navigating between the historical version of things, the mythic version of things with the national myth of Vietnam and the way that they tell the story, and then my own storytelling prerogatives and needs as an inventor of the story.
Yes, nice. So do you see the story, I'm back to Brownstorm right now, as an allegory for contemporary resistance against female subjugation or against or even modern neo-colonialism?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be productively viewed that way because I can't help but draw from modern context and as much as I am writing a work of historical fiction, I think what the fire under me and what animates me is this moment in which we have to worry about encroaching fascism and the deep misogyny within that fascism and so on. So I absolutely welcome people reading it with that interpretation. Yeah.
Looks like the timing's good. There's a really fascinating glossary at the back of this book that defines Vietnamese words, places, people, and includes whether the characters were real or fictional, which I found really quite interesting. Had you always planned on having a glossary? Was it a suggestion to you after you finished the book? Because that clearly was not an easy thing to do. I mean, that is a dense glossary.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting journey because I had a glossary, in my first draft, I knew I wanted a glossary. And then the publisher said, no, take that out, we don't want that. And then later on, in a subsequent draft, a different editor said, could we have kind of a glossary or something like that? And I'm like, oh, sure, fine, I'll put together a glossary, you know. So it sort of had a little bit of a circuitous journey, but I felt like it was important because it prevents me from having to do a lot of translating within the text. Translating in the terms that Viet Thanh Nguyen uses. We talked about translating in literature. It means that, like the way that you would say if Jonathan Franzen writes so and so was eating a sandwich, he wouldn't. This is Viet Thanh Nguyen's example, by the way. I'm just stealing that for the moment. Then he wouldn't say he's eating a sandwich, which is 2 pieces of bread with some ingredients in the middle, which may include et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So why should he have to explain what pho is? When there's a reader who isn't familiar with that, they can do their homework and do their research and so on. So I'm a little bit in between there, and I do translate a little bit when I say ao zai, I refer to it as a dress. I don't just say it's an ao zai, I deal with that. But in order to avoid those acts of translation all throughout, it's good to have that kind of glossary for those who, I don't want the reader to have to stop every few pages and go to the internet,
Yeah, that was not my experience. Reading the book, I didn't ever feel like I had to keep flipping back to the glossary to see what was what. I think contextually, virtually all of it made sense.
Yeah.
But just the glossary as just a separate read, I found really interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah. I do have another question, and it's related to Neil Gaiman. So I'm going to pause on that and put it out to you because we do want to leave time for not just questions, but book signing as well. So to all of you, and Shane, I have no idea if the online audience gets to ask anything, but if you've got questions, you can certainly put those out there.
I have a question. The drugs are legendary in Vietnam.
Yeah.
I was unaware of the drum legend. Is that historically accurate?
The drum?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the fact that there were drums that were used either in war or ritual or for music, and that were that Ma Yuan gathered them together. He's the Chinese general, and had them melted into base metal and then formed these pillars and Dung Lam, and said that the Chinese Han will rule as long as these pillars stand. And those pillars, nobody knows what happened to them, but we still find these drums, right?
I heard the legend of the elephant.
Yeah.
Where'd they get it from, or where'd they go? I saw no elephant.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that's one thing that the historian I was working with, told me that there wouldn't have been elephants in that time in that region, and certainly not used for war purposes. And so that's something that I leaned into the myth and allowed, in the novel, because it was important to the visual vocabulary of the twin sisters.
I was going to ask the $64 question. You are ethnically Vietnamese?
I'm half Vietnamese, yeah. My father's from Vietnam.
Okay, that's cool. That's how you took his last name.
Yes.
Yes, okay, that's cool. When did he come over?
He came over in 1962 on
Really?
scholarship, yeah, and
Really?
was in Bozeman, Montana, at the Montana State University, and
Where did he come from over there, do you know?
Nha Trang,
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
and but his family moved all over in Vietnam. They were first, when they divided the North and South. His family was living in Nam Dinh, but they moved south to Hanoi, and then they eventually settled in Nha Trang.
Were you raised bilingually?
No.
I thought it'd be a very difficult language. That's why.
Yeah, it is. I thought I would pick it up easier because I grew up hearing my dad speak it.
Yeah.
But when we went to travel to Vietnam, I had the darndest time trying to. I thought I knew it from listening to like Rosetta Stone or whatever, and man, did I not know it. I mean, they were
Really felt stupid.
looking at me. I was going around saying "ciao, ciao," and that it's supposed to mean hello, but I said it with a different accent, so it means porridge. Porridge.
Because I was not expecting you.
Yeah.
I am not surprised that there were no documents or books about the Trung sisters here, and states are written in English, but I'm curious, in Vietnam, there are not more resources or more primary sources that historians now in Vietnam can refer to?
Yeah, there are. There's a lot more in Vietnam, and my hope is that the interest in Trung sisters is such that we get more translations and more historical works about the Trung sisters, and so this is certainly not meant to be a sort of definitive work, but a beginning of a conversation is the hope.
Sure, I was just more curious if you got to refer to any Vietnamese sources that anyone would have helped translate for you.
Yeah, my dad was my source for translations and things. So, like one thing that is not published anywhere in English, as far as I can find, is the generals of the Trung sisters army, and except for a little bit about Phong Nguyen, and because her story is really extraordinary, she's the one who gave birth on the battlefield and then slung the baby into her quiver and kept on fighting.
That's a crazy scene in the novel, that's what I just want to say.
Yeah, and so believe it or not, the publisher wanted to cut that, and I said,
Oh
she said,
my gosh.
what reason is there for the scene? I said, sheer badassery.
Oh, that is such a cool scene in the book too.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm
yeah.
so glad that you
Yeah,
keep it. Yeah, good.
I had to do my heels for that one, but so yeah, the generals, the beyond Phong Nguyen, but the other generals' names, and unfortunately, a lot of that, the first draft was about 600 pages. A lot of that was cut. The general attention on the generals and stuff like that. But that was one thing that I would not have had access to without those Vietnamese sources that were translated by my father. Yes.
So I did some research online in Chinese.
Yeah.
And I find the Trung sisters' Chinese names.
Yeah.
Not surprisingly, they are considered evil
Yeah.
rebels
Right.
in Chinese history. But some people even said, oh, that's interesting. Those two evil sisters, they are considered as saints in Vietnam.
Yeah.
But General Ma Yuan is very well regarded in China. So I wonder, when you did research for your book, did you ever read some even English translation of Chinese history?
Yeah, the writings of Ma Yuan, the difficulty and the challenge of marching his armies to the Lac Viet territory, and very particularly one thing that really stood out. There were like miasmas, sort of like deadly gases apparently, and there was a bird that died mid-flight, and you saw it on his journey, and that's something that struck him and struck me as a reader, and I had to include in the book. The terrain, these narrow paths along mountainous regions where I think it was called Ghost Gate Pass, where if the horse is, just steps an inch to the left, it falls down, taking the soldier with it, and so they started out with a massive army and arrived with a significantly reduced army. Were still able to win because of the internal sort of betrayal of the allies of the Trung sisters. But yeah, no, it's not a surprise to me that they're portrayed that way. A lot of the challenge comes with a lot of the historical accounts use terminology which Vietnamese readers would find offensive. So, for example, the region in most of the historical accounts refer to it as Xiaozi, right? Yeah, Xiaozi, and that if I'm not mistaken, that means that like curved toes or something like that. And so it was referring to the Vietnamese people as having these weird messed up feet, and they don't like that. So when I in the first draft, my dad read it, and he was like, no, you don't refer to it as Xiaozi. You can't, and there are a lot of things like that because the historical account comes from China, has a lot of things that are biased against or that these people would feel offended by. Yes.
I'm going to ask a historian's question. Since this is a story that does take place almost 2,000 years ago,
Yeah.
I was wondering if when you were writing, if you have some dilemmas about modernizing the language too much, because
Right.
on the one hand, one danger will be jarringly anachronistic.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I mean, it passes a foreign country, and it's like it would be incomprehensible to historically accurate.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I experienced that throughout. I mean, one of the things I described in terms of having to have written a couple books before this is like the challenge that I had with Adventures of Joe Harper is having to listen to anything that sounded slightly off and slightly too much like a parody of Twain and not like a voice in the Pike County of the mid-19th century. And so I think some of that sensitivity of ear was necessary for me to acquire for the writing of this book. I'm sure for some readers it will fail, and for some readers it will succeed. I hope that it succeeds more than it fails. But a lot of the editing was that sort of revising to the ear and making sure that it sounded, not as people would have authentically spoken, because as you say, it would be incomprehensible, but somewhere between myth and reality in a way that is appealing and feels real.
We have a question from the virtual audience, and I apologize if this has already been asked and answered, but
Sure.
I have not been able to hear the entire conversation. So Kate asks, what was the greatest challenge in writing from the viewpoints of two different women?
That's a good question. I think that the sibling relationships really appeal to me. I think that I find them very fascinating, and so the challenge was making the contrast between them too neat. The way that siblings work, and that, as I've observed, is that sometimes they will identify as in one way in terms of their interest, in terms of their just whole identity as a way of differentiating themselves from their siblings, right? And so there's a tendency to sort of become more extremely different from your sibling, but you also share this kind of common DNA and this common history and so on. So in some ways you cannot help but share these qualities with your siblings. And so I think maybe that was hardest because it was something I focused so much on, and something I thought a lot about is the way that siblinghood creates this kind of forced contrast between people who are very similar. As far as writing from the viewpoint of the two women, there's a very great and helpful book, which unfortunately was written after I wrote this, but I still enjoyed sort of describing some of the same experiences I had in terms of reckoning with writing from a perspective that is not my own. And it's called Appropriate by Paisley Rekdal, and it's written as a letter to a student that was struggling with this idea of writing from another point of view. And of course, in fiction, unless you're just writing from all of your identity perspectives, you're always appropriating. And so to do it well and to do it lovingly, there's lots of research that needs to be done and a lot of care that needs to be taken into it. I think one thing that helped is, and I don't remember the source of this quote, but it was consciousness is not gendered, right? And so their experiences certainly are different between men and women, how they're treated and so on. But consciousness itself does not have a gender, right? And so thinking about them as Chongchak and Chongni, as opposed to here is a woman who has all these other qualities, rather than trying to surround the selfhood of the characters, thinking about them from the self outward was my way of accessing their perspectives. Yeah.
If I can ask one more question, sorry.
Sure.
I'm curious just because you mentioned 600 pages and then getting cut down by your publisher. And
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's normal for the process.
Yeah.
But as someone who is half Vietnamese, and I am too, and so I grew up with the story too.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you had to advocate harder for this book than your previous ones in terms of convincing a publisher of the value of certain scenes and the significance of certain scenes? And then in tandem,
Yeah.
I'm curious, is this going to get translated into Vietnamese?
Right. So I had to advocate more for a number of reasons, but the main reason is that my prior books were published by smaller presses and academic presses, and this first one published by a corporate press, and they were a lot more hands-on and a lot more concerned about commercial viability and things like that. So a 600-page novel is not something that they can sell. So and a lot of the things they took out were those kind of the generals, the military stuff, and ultimately it was going from feeling as though nothing was indispensable to realizing that there were certain things that were dispensable. It just needed to be it needed to attend a line level to the whole book several times in order to get there. As far as being translated into Vietnamese, it's only been out for a day. Maybe it will be. I do know there are some translations, rights that have been sold, but so far I haven't heard about any rights to the Vietnamese translation. I do know that there have been SBTN is the television network for the Vietnamese diaspora, and they were very positive about the book and very proud about the book, and so early reception has been good. But of course, the Vietnamese government is something very different, and they may find things that are objectionable to them and things that they want to censor and things, and so I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I may have to change some content, or may be uncomfortable with changes that they want to make to the book. So,
yeah, you mentioned having to navigate the inclusion of details of the myth with historical facts and your own narrative priorities.
Yeah.
You grew up with the myth.
Yeah.
And your original attachment was with the myth. How did your own understanding and experience with the story evolve as you dove into the other areas?
So it does share more in common with the myth than it does with the history. I'll say that. There were things that I had put in deliberately to honor the historical Chung sisters that ultimately were taken out because the myth was much more appealing, right? And so, for example, Ma Yuan, the Chinese general, claims to have captured and beheaded the Chung sisters. But in the mythic national myth of Vietnam, they jump off a cliff like in the Red River, like Thelma and Louise. And it's more of the sort of a beautiful kind of noble death. And so in the first draft, I had them jumping off the cliff, but then Ma Yuan retrieving their bodies and beheading them in order to take them as a prize to the emperor and as a way of justifying sort of his claim. And but the publishers felt strongly that the book should end with the death of the Chung sisters and not have this kind of aftermath. And so we negotiate a little bit around that, but ultimately, the version that is in this book is the mythic version where they're jumping off, and that's the end of their story. So, I'm trying to think of other occasions and incidents. one way I deviated from both the national myth and the historical version is when Chung Chok's husband and father are killed. There's nothing to indicate that the Chung sisters were actually there when it happened, but it was important narratively for them to be there. I mean, it's not from their perspective as in first-person perspective, but their perspectives are the most important ones. And so to have this scene happen off camera, so to speak, would have been narratively flat. And so, that's, another example where I sort of had to make that choice. But that's one where it's not sort of strictly the mythic version.
Well, another giant round of applause. Thank you all so much for joining us. We do have books available for sale at the desk. We are going to do the signing back here at this table in the back of the room. And thank you again for this incredible conversation.
Should I bring this chair, or is there? No,
Yeah, I'll help.
Okay.